Hey YouTube, Josh here with Tipsy Python, your casual guide to learning how to program with Python. My goals for today's video are to discuss the basics of HTTP requests, and then also write a function that leverages web requests to source some external data. And on the heels of the Glenmore G12, I decided to do another 12-year whiskey, Weller 12, or Pappy Jr. as I like to call it. Nah, I'm just playing, y'all. While this one is extremely overhyped in the bourbon world, it is a decent sipper and I do like having it around. Alright guys, I feel like this video is important because all in all, there's three main uses for Python. I say first, there's general scripting like working with the file system, simple operations. We've done a lot of this. Secondly, there's kind of the data science track with Python. There's like machine learning and analytics, and then also in there I'd say there's like ETL and data processing and a little bit of the stuff that we dabbled with last time in the pandas video. And the last major use of Python is web development. Now, while in this particular video, we're not going to go into how to make web servers or anything like that, we are going to start discussing some of the topics in that domain, and we're going to learn how to source data with web requests. Again, let me be very, very clear with that. The internet is this huge thing. There's no way that I can discuss everything you need to know in this video, but let's start dabbling with it, and I'll put the keys in your hand, and after that you can keep on learning. I'm just going to start by rambling about the workings of the web. When you navigate to a website like YouTube, the view that gets delivered is facilitated by HTTP, HyperText Transfer Protocol. For now, just focus on protocol. That's the important part. A protocol is a prescribed set of rules that two machines use to communicate with each other. Now, there's a lot of different types of protocols, but HTTP in particular is a request-response protocol. For instance, when you navigate to a website, the browser in your computer originates and sends a request to a server. It doesn't matter who it is, it's just some computer over here. So this computer, the server, receives the request, it retrieves data, or it performs an action, or it does whatever it needs to do, and then it sends a response back to your computer. Request, response. This is a very powerful pattern in programming. Let's observe how it works with Python. Get your typers ready, get your drinks ready, get your Weller 12 ready. I don't like to admit that's very good, but it does have that characteristic like mellow wheated bourbon flavor. Let's get into it. I'm going straight to Jupiter. All you need to perform web requests is a standard library module called URL lib. Now this library has everything that you actually need to make the requests, but a lot of developers prefer the user experience of a third-party library called requests. Let's install that now. I'm going to open a terminal or command line or PowerShell. I'm saying py-m pip, like we learned last time, install requests. And it's installed. This is a cool package. I'll actually link to the documentation for it in the description below. Now to use it in my code, I'm going to say import requests. Now before I do the first request, remember, we're kind of simulating what a browser does. We're making a web request. So let's request a resource that we're all familiar with. I'm going to make a request to google.com and we'll see what it returns. Going into the code, I'm going to say requests.get. That's the request method that our browsers use. And then a URL, https://google.com. This returns an object. I'm just going to set r as the variable to hold it. To take a look at the contents, let's say print r.content. And I know what you're thinking, like, whoa, this isn't what I signed up for. But keep in mind, when you request google.com, it's not made for human consumption. The server isn't returning a page for you to view, it's returning a page for the browser to interpret the view. But looking at this, it's nothing that complicated. Like, it's still Latin characters, it's still human readable. Let's try to see what's going on here. I'm going to keep this open, and then side by side, let's open google.com. Now scanning through the text, I get to this part here. I see some tags with images, I see maps, I see play, I see YouTube, Gmail. These links that we're seeing here are actually the tiles in this menu. And then scrolling a little further down the code here, let me go to the actual google.com page. I see a couple of inputs, one with value Google search, one with value I'm feeling lucky, just like the search buttons on the Google homepage. Now here, we're looking at some combination of HTML, CSS, JavaScript. This isn't meant for human consumption, but if we put our minds to it, we can figure out what's going on here. And I realize this is probably the point of the episode where you're thinking like, wow, Josh, I can't believe I wasted 10 episodes on this. But hear me out, we could do stuff with this. Suppose that we learned how to parse up these HTML tags, and we wanted to create something like maybe a currency conversion calculator. Then we could do something like using Python to request a website that holds the conversion data, get the web page back, parse up the HTML tags, and then grab the values out of it and use it in our own code. Just think about it for a second, don't actually do it. This method of retrieving a web page and then taking the contents out of it, extracting only the data you want, is called scraping. Now, while scraping can be effective, and people do actually use it all the time, it's not particularly efficient. I mean, we have this huge block of text that we have to parse our values out of. And then secondly, on the server side, someone's hosting hardware that's serving this site, and if they see requests coming in really fast one after another, they can tell that this isn't a human using the website. And for this reason, scraping a website is often against the terms of service of any website that you're using, and they can block your access for doing it. But there's a concept here, there's a nugget of truth that makes sense, that this request response protocol is an efficient way to send information. Over time, developers have actually purposefully used HTTP as a way to expose their application's functionality. An application that does this is called an API, an application programming interface. And while there's many types of APIs, a web API is one like the web service that Google uses to serve its page. A web server can run a certain type of application that accepts a web request and then execute some code that's actually designed to be programmatically consumed. Now, most APIs, like other web applications, like Gmail or like Facebook, require a sign up and a login to use. But there's also some that are just open, available for public use. Let's search for a few of those. I'm going to Google free open REST APIs. And one of the first search results is this GitHub link that hosts public APIs. And looking down into the documentation here, we'll see that there's a lot of different types of APIs. One that I'm kind of interested in is currency exchange. And there's actually a few I can use here, but I'm going to go to exchangeratesAPI.io. Scrolling down through this site, they actually have the documentation here. And I can actually use this resource right here to get the latest foreign exchange reference rates. Now, a GET request, the kind that we used earlier, is actually the same type of request method that our browser uses, so we can look at this in our browser. I'm going to navigate to the URL that it provided. Now take a look at that output. Does that look familiar? It's JSON. If that name doesn't ring any bells to you, go back a couple videos and look at the video I made on dictionaries and JSON. Just looking through it, we'll see that we have rates, and then we have an array. It's a list of key value pairs. Now this looks like something that's more usable in our code. Let's implement that. Going back to the documentation, it says there's actually another resource that I can hit where I input a base currency and it gives me the exchange rate for all these other currencies. Now to try this out ourselves, I'm just going to copy the URL and go back to Jupyter. I'm going to put my URL here for safekeeping. I'm going to request this URL with the same code that I used to request google.com. All I have to do is use the same piece of code and swap out the URL. Now we'll make the request and I'm going to print r.content. And now if you're thinking through the steps, you're thinking, all right, now import JSON, I'll use JSON to load this into a dictionary. No, this kind of thing is done so often that the request module actually handles that functionality for us. To illustrate this, I'm going to print r.json. It's a method. I'm going to use some empty parentheses. And you'll see this is no longer a byte string. This is actually a dictionary object now. So using it, I could set a variable like conversion dictionary equals r.json. Then I could reference these items out of here using bracket notation. Conversion dict, bracket rates. And then let's suppose we want to just grab something like Canadian dollars. We use another piece of bracket notation. For data that's frequently changing, it may not be practical to hard code it into your application. And for these types of cases, one solution may be actually retrieving that data from a web API. As our final exercise, let's just make a function that wraps this logic really nicely and that we could use in our applications. I'm just going to write a function starting with the def keyword. I'm going to call it USD to CAD, Canadian dollars. I'll take an argument of a US dollar amount. The first thing that I need to do is get the exchange rate. For that, I'm just going to grab the request from up here. We're going to make the request. Then I'll set a variable, the Canadian dollar rate, request.json, rates, Canadian dollars. To get our Canadian dollar amount, all I have to do is multiply the US dollar amount that was input times the conversion rate. And then we'll return actually a rounded amount, the CAD amount that we're returning to 2 decimal places. And once we have a function like this defined, it would be really easy to use in our code. All we'd have to do is call the function, input an amount, and it returns the conversion amount for us. What I just went over is only a drop in the bucket. There's a lot to learn about web services, but hopefully this gives you a jump off point and an understanding that in our applications, it's not always local resources that we're using. We can use the web to pull in the data or the processing that we need. And there's a lot of API documentation out there, and trust me, they're not page turners, they're not fun to read, but you can do things like checking your Gmail through the Gmail API, or monitoring your YouTube metrics, or looking at your Reddit posts. I haven't used it personally, but there's even a REST API for Tinder if you want to automate your love life. APIs are everywhere, and it's my hope that after watching this video and seeing how simple they are to use, that you feel empowered as a developer to use APIs in your code, and if so inclined to continue learning, and eventually someday you'll be writing some REST APIs of your own. But right now, I'm just inclined to have a pour of this Weller 12 real quick, taking it straight to the nose. My favorite part, and honestly I think many people's favorite part of Weller 12 is the nose, because it has this delicious aroma to it. It smells like a cherry pie does. I mean, there's everything in there. It has like this grain layer at the bottom. You can definitely smell the wheat. It's super sweet and super fruity and floral at the same time. Let's have a little sip and see what we think. That's nice. When you taste it, you definitely get this layer of oak. It's been in a barrel for 12 years, so you get that layer of oak lining your tongue, and then building on top of it you have these additive flavors. You have like a layer of brown sugar that makes it sweet. You do have a cherry taste in there and a little bit of vanilla, and then it has a long enjoyable finish, notes of oak, chocolate with just a sprinkle of cinnamon on top. My thoughts are, while Weller 12 does taste enjoyable, it's really a sniffing bourbon. The aroma on Weller 12 is very, very inviting. I'd say even better than the taste. And there is a bouquet of flavors in this one, so it's enjoyable to sip on, but really a pleasure to smell. But be warned, do not overpay for this bourbon. There's a lot of people trying to gouge you for it. Alright guys, I really hope you enjoyed today's video. I think it was an important one. If you did enjoy it, please consider subscribing to my channel. If you want to review the code that I wrote, I'm going to be posting it in the description below in a Jupyter notebook on my GitHub. Until next time, friends, Tipsy Python.